from the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador. This is From the South, and I am Soini Gray. We start in Venezuela, where President Nicolas Maduro has been re-elected and will run the country for 6 more years. Maduro promised the people he will prioritize Venezuela's economy and social-economic development during his new term. Surrounded by his supporters at the Miraflores Palace, the president also called for a lasting dialogue with the opposition parties. He asked all Venezuelans to leave any conflict or fight behind and make way for reconciliation with all sectors of the country.
I call for a lasting dialogue process with all political, economic, social and cultural groups of Venezuela. Reunion, reconciliation and permanent dialogue is what Venezuela needs. I believe in a new era for Venezuela. I believe in a new beginning. I believe in peace as the foundation for national harmony. But most of all, I believe in national harmony as a foundation to reach agreements and move forward together towards a better path, one of definitive improvement, one that brings solutions to the economic problems brought by the war against the people. This will be hard. This might not happen overnight, but we will make it.
The re-elected president further thanked the Venezuelan people for their support. He also congratulated the National Electoral Council and celebrated the participation of international observers during Sunday's election. Some 150 international observers from 30 countries and international organizations were in Venezuela for the elections.
It's incredible how our people never back down, how our people never surrender, how our people always have a smile during the hardest battles. That's why I thank you all. I can say that today we made history. We had a great victory, a victory of the people.
Tibisay Lucena, president of the National Electoral Council, announced the official results once the vote counts showed an irreversible trend with 92% of the ballots processed. President Maduro took 5.8 million votes, while his closest rival, former Governor Henry Falcon, got 1.8 million votes. Javier Bertucci followed with 925,000 votes, and finally Ronaldo Quijada with 34,614 votes. Lucena said about 8.6 million Venezuelans voted out of an electoral registry of 20.5 million people. And the former presidential opposition candidate Henry Falcon said he will not recognize the election results, alleging irregularities at the polling stations. He called for a new election to be held.
In such a situation, it's obligatory for us to denounce that the agreement signed was not respected and does not exist. And from there, we don't recognize this electoral process as valid, as having taken place. For us, there were no elections. New elections in Venezuela need to take place.
But the opposition candidate Javier Bertucci said he will continue to work for Venezuela and will support any dialogue initiative.
Now, I'm not going to invalidate that all of the votes that were cast, or that the government cast, that they are going to be fraudulent, because I don't use this term. It doesn't seem just to me. What I am saying is that the government is not capable of managing the crisis that the state is in. It gives a good opportunity to leave this administration with votes. So for this reason, I say, I'll return to the street, return again to run for the country, and ask again for the opposition and for the government support that we initiate a dialogue to try to achieve one bloc, which will be able to face what comes next. I am sure it will come during the next elections.
President Maduro's re-election has been seen suspiciously by most of the Western media outlets, and some world leaders have condemned the election results. The president of Chile, Sebastián Piñera, said that his country, like the majority of democratic countries, would not recognize the vote. On Twitter, he said Venezuela's elections do not meet the minimum standards for a true democracy. They are not clean or legitimate elections, and they do not represent the free and sovereign will of the Venezuelan people. Russia and China have both called for the election results in Venezuela to be respected. The director of the Department for Latin America, of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Russia, Alexander Shetinin, said that the United States and its Western partners tried to obstruct the presidential elections that Maduro won, while China says it respects the results and will not interfere in Venezuela's internal affairs.
Regarding the Venezuelan election, you know China's position is that it does not interfere with the internal affairs of other countries. We believe the Venezuelan government and people can handle their own affairs. At the same time, the relevant parties should respect the choice of the Venezuelan people. If there are disputes, relevant disputes should be handled in accordance with Venezuelan law.
And members of the Lima group of countries say they are not recognizing the election result and have decided to reduce their diplomatic relations with Venezuela. They released a statement saying that Venezuela needs democracy and the rule of law to be restored. The Lima group has 14 members, including Argentina, Brazil, Canada, Chile, and Colombia. And the Spanish Prime Minister Mariano Rajoy tweeted that Venezuela did not follow basic democratic standards at Sunday's elections. He added that he and his EU colleagues will look into what measures need to be taken to stop Venezuelans from suffering. And now we take you live to the Venezuelan capital of Caracas, where our correspondent Ian Bruce has been covering the elections non-stop. So Ian, tell us, what's the mood in Venezuela in the streets now after the big day?
Well, Soini, I think Venezuela is waking up to a new political situation, and I think people are digesting that. On the home front, I think that has two main elements. On the one hand, clearly a very considerable victory for President Nicolas Maduro, with almost 47 points difference separating him from the second-place candidate, Henry Falcon. So I think people feel that that gives the government a new element of stability to address its plans, and particularly its plans to deal with the economic problems. We saw those people celebrating outside the presidential palace last night, well into the night, into the early hours, and that gives an idea of how they're feeling about things. I think the other element is on the side of the opposition. Curiously, an opposition which seems to be now somewhat more united, or possibly more united in defeat than it was prior to the election. That comes after Henry Falcon himself said he wouldn't recognize the election results. Javier Bertucci was a little bit more equivocal, but suggested he might or might not. So there's a certain, or at least a possibility, and there's a lot of talk about this on the social media, a certain convergence. Enrique Capriles has, for example, called for this, a convergence between what had been a very divided opposition now around a rejectionist position, if you like. But, of course, what they're going to do about that, having suffered that defeat, is far from clear.
And Bruce, you need to, what has the response from the foreign governments? Sorry, what about the response from foreign governments, both negative and positive? How is that being received in Venezuela?
Well, I think it's fairly predictable, isn't it, Soini? On the one hand, we've had, expressions of support and recognition and congratulations from countries which have been more or less allied with the Venezuelan government for some time and have supported the changes in Venezuela. So Cuba, Bolivia, El Salvador have all come out supporting that. So indeed have Russia and China, interestingly, came out with quite a strong statement saying, the results should be respected. So all of that's obviously important backing for the government. On the other hand, equally predictably, the United States, the Lima group of countries, which represents basically the countries aligned with the United States in Latin America, and several others have all come out criticizing the results, saying they won't recognize the results, and so on and so forth, basically repeating what they've said before. So I don't think there are any major surprises there.
Quickly, what's next?
And I should add, maybe, Soini, that I think one thing that's shaping this, of course, is the media narrative, the narrative in the international media, which, again, puts all the emphasis on what it says is a very low turnout and therefore the illegitimacy of the results. I think we will hear more about that today. I think some government figures are likely to come out and start talking about that, because the argument on the Chavista side that's being put forward is, of course, that yes, it may have been a disappointing turnout in some respects, but Given the very difficult economic circumstances in Venezuela, it's not really that bad. It's actually quite comparable with turnouts in many other countries. It's higher. President Maduro got a higher percentage of the electorate, if you like, than, for example, the president of Chile or several European leaders have won.
That's an interesting point, Ian. But more importantly, what's next for President Maduro?
Well, obviously the economy, Soini, that's the number one overriding issue. President Maduro said this many, many times in his campaign. Every single campaign speech, I think, he said, what we need is to win these elections in order to, together with the organized communities, to address the very considerable economic difficulties we face, partly, of course, for internal reasons, but also, very importantly, because of the stranglehold, particularly the financial stranglehold placed on Venezuela by international sanctions and by this artificially created and galloping rate of inflation, which is really eating away at people's purchasing power. So those are the really big issues. That is the really big issue that the government has to tackle. It's very aware of that, and it'll be important to keep watching to see exactly how they plan to address it.
Thank you so much for that update, Ian Bruce. We've been speaking to our correspondent, Ian Bruce in Caracas. He's been covering the elections extensively for quite some time. Now, the re-election of President Maduro in Venezuela has been celebrated by Venezuelan solidarity groups around the world. We're now being joined by David Denny of the Friends of Venezuela Solidarity Committee in Barbados. Hi, David. Can you tell me a little bit about your group, first and foremost, the Friends of Venezuela Solidarity Committee? Why were you all formed and what do you do?
Well, our committee is now 5 years old, and our committee brings together a number of progressive persons in Barbados who are very supportive of the government and people of Venezuela and appreciative of the work that Venezuela have been doing in relation to its solidarity work with Africa, the Caribbean, Asia, and even with the Palestine people. So we in Barbados, feel happy to be part of a movement that is standing in solidarity with the government and people of Venezuela.
Now, David, obviously, I don't know how much of my previous interview with Ian that you got to listen to, or even if you've been able to track the program. We've been speaking about how the international media, a lot of international bodies have criticized yesterday's election results. China and Russia have broken the mold, and they have supported the election results in Venezuela. What does the Venezuela Solidarity community think about yesterday's elections, how they were run, and what is your general statement on how it's on the results?
Well, we saw a democratic process in Venezuela, and we are very happy to see that two international countries such as China and Russia, are giving full solidarity support to the Venezuelan people and to the government of Venezuela. We in the Friends of Venezuela Solidarity Committee in Barbados will work with other Caribbean organizations to show our solidarity with the Venezuelan people and to oppose any form of action coming from right-wing forces within the Americas, especially the United States of America, who will, be working towards trying to create the conditions for any form of action against the government and people of Venezuela. But we are very supportive, and we will work with our forces within the Caribbean region to show that kind of solidarity with the government and people of Venezuela.
David, let's switch gears just a bit. You are in Barbados. Barbados has an election on Thursday. I wanted to ask you, what are some of the key issues that you think the electorate in Barbados need to be focusing on for Thursday's elections?
Well, the key issues in Barbados as it relates to the election would be related to youth development, the whole question in terms of dealing with the transport system in Barbados, the whole question in relation to health issues, the issues relating to being able to have free access to university education. The other areas is related to the whole economic situation in Barbados. We are going through some very serious times in Barbados,
Especially with the issue of foreign exchange. Really quickly, David, you all had a very unusual situation in Barbados where Prime Minister Frundle Stewart dissolved the parliament and then took quite some time before he actually named the election date. How has that impacted the electoral campaign, and what sort of results are you expecting to see on Thursday?
Well, the people of Barbados felt that that was not good for our democracy in Barbados in terms of dissolving parliament and then waiting for a very long period before you could call the elections. The people of Barbados wanted the election immediately because the 5 years was up. And I expect that the Barbados Labour Party will win the new government and that there will be a change in Barbados.
Thank you so much for that update, David Denny. We probably will be talking to you possibly even on Thursday about the election as it's taking place, because Telesur is going to be doing some special coverage of the elections in Barbados. We were talking to David Denny of the Venezuelan Friends of Venezuela Solidarity Committee in Barbados. Time now for a break. Join us again after this look at what our multimedia colleagues are reporting. Welcome back. Paraguay opened its embassy in Jerusalem on Monday. It is the second country after Guatemala to follow the United States in the political move from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Now, most world powers do not recognize Israel's sovereignty over the entire city. During the inauguration ceremony, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu thanked Paraguayan President Horacio Curtis.
Paraguay supported the creation of the State of Israel, the recognition of the State of Israel in the United Nations. We will never forget that. Paraguay, before but especially under your leadership, took a very bold stance in international affairs and refused to cooperate with the lies directed against Israel. We always remember that.
This ceremony has a profound significance as it expresses our sincere friendship and the full solidarity of Paraguay towards Israel. The affection and the admiration I feel for this noble and brave nation is grounded in shared values and principles, such as democracy, liberty, defense of human rights, respectful tolerance, non-discrimination, and peaceful coexistence. I profoundly admire these people who defend heroically their sovereignty and integrity, the right to live in peace, building a nation with exemplary economic and social development, prosperity, and well-being for their children.
In Cuba, identification of victims of the plane crash from last Friday is taking place. The identification process is likely to take nearly 1 month. The Boeing 737 crashed on Friday shortly after taking off from Havana, leaving 110 people dead. There is an ongoing investigation to find out the cause of the accident.
The Mexican medical team arrived in Cuba yesterday evening and this morning we retrieved DNA samples from the victims' relatives. This will allow us to proceed a bit faster.
I'm the mother-in-law of Fran Torres Gonzalez. I looked after him as if he were my own son, and they lived here with me. They have their own house and 2 daughters. His house is still under construction, and now we need help from others. His 2 daughters, 5 and 6 years old, are enrolled at a kindergarten and nursery. Here is his mother Elena and his sister Julita. The whole family is very distressed, and we know all Cubans are going through the same grief. The most urgent thing now is to identify the body as soon as possible and bring him home and have a proper funeral.
In Colombia, presidential candidate Gustavo Petro says an electoral fraud is being attempted or being planned for the upcoming elections next Sunday. Via Twitter, the left-wing candidate explained that the software that will be used in the elections cannot guarantee transparency and that the observers sent by the European Union have not reviewed it. Meanwhile, the right-wing candidate Ivan Duque closed his presidential campaign in the capital city of Bogota. According to the latest polls, Duque is leading the race but will have to face his main opponent, Gustavo Petro, in a second round. Former Colombian President Álvaro Uribe, considered to be Duque's mentor and allegedly linked to paramilitary groups, was also present. The first round of the presidential elections will be held next Sunday, but if no candidate achieves an outright majority, the vote will go to a runoff, which will be held on June 17th.
You have proposed a Christian economy for the country, a solitary understanding, a country with equality, a country without corruption, a country without disorder, a country without wasteful expending, a country with less taxes.
In Mexico, presidential candidates held a second debate in which the leftist Andrés Manuel López Obrador, the front-runner according to the polls, was the main target. U.S. President Donald Trump was also one of the focuses of the discussion, in which candidates agreed that Mexico needs to be more independent from its northern neighbor. A third debate will be held on June 12th. The presidential election is scheduled for July 1st, a date in which the bicameral Congress and local governors will also be elected.
Si convertimos a Chiapas en el California que necesita México, su potencial es enorme. Cooperemos con los países de Centroamérica.
Time now for another short break, but join us again after this look at what our multimedia colleagues are reporting. The Syrian army has pushed Islamic State militants out of the capital Damascus's south pocket, according to state television. After weeks of fighting with militants, the army cleared all insurgents from the enclave. ISIS now controls only 2 besieged desert areas in eastern Syria, while another insurgent group holds a small enclave in the southwest of the country. A temporary humanitarian ceasefire had been put in place since Sunday near the capital to allow women, children, and the elderly to leave. Hundreds of demonstrators protested in Tel Aviv for a weekly anti-corruption demonstration on Sunday, demanding the resignation of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. On February 13th, the Israeli police recommended that Netanyahu be indicted for bribery and fraud. Over the past year, Netanyahu has been questioned in 3 corruption probes, but he insists that they are all without merit. The Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has arrived in the Russian city of Sochi for an informal meeting with President Vladimir Putin. The leaders discussed a wide range of topics, including the economy and military ties. Both the countries have a long history of strong strategic and diplomatic ties. Russia and India have formed core partnerships in a number of international relations like BRICS, an association of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, and the Shanghai Cooperation. In Iran, the world-famous Persian rug designs have been given a contemporary makeover for this summer's FIFA World Cup in Russia. The carpets feature different designs and show woven images of Moscow side by side with historic sites in Iran and the logos of those teams taking place in the World Cup. They will be sent to a number of locations around the world to be gifted to organizations including the Aston Quds Razavi Museum in Mashhad, the Russian Football Union, and the Football Federation of Iran, as well as to the teams that Iran will be competing with at the tournament this summer. Tourists and locals walk across the sea in the South Korean island of Jindo during the Sea Parting Festival that masks an extreme low tide. The annual phenomenon is believed to be the result of tidal harmonics caused by the relative positions of the Earth, Moon, and the Sun. The 4-day festival is a popular attraction for both locals and tourists alike, and visitors enjoy the event with music and dance. Now that story has brought us to the end of this news brief. For these and many other stories, you can find them on our website at talisiotv.net/English. But you can also join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Talisio English, I'm Sony Gray. Thank you so much for watching.